This podcast is produced by Visionary Studios. Hi everyone, I'm Mitchell Rail.
And I'm Wade Clausen.
And welcome back to Let's Unpack That. So today we are joined by Brian Phillips. Brian, welcome to the pod. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, y'all. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So, Brian, people may recognize you from TikTok for your gym crush story times or your just trials and tribulations of living in LA. But I think today would be really fun to just kind of unpack your whole story and kind of get to go from the beginnings to how you are now making that transition to living in LA and what that experience has been like for you. So let's start at the beginning, Brian. What is the origin story?
Absolutely. Well, my goodness, it's a story to say the least. But thanks firstly just for allowing me the platform to be able to tell my story. So I'm really thankful for the opportunity to be here and to kind of dive in with y'all. So I was born and raised in Oklahoma. I grew up for the first part of my life in a small town called Owasso. It's conservative, kind of near Tulsa. And I spent, ever since I was born to fifth grade there with my family. I made a lot of friends and it was really great. And then around fifth grade, my stepdad actually got a job in Norman, Oklahoma, which is a bit more of a city. It's a progressive college town. And I ended up moving there, and it was about 3 hours from everyone. And I was really upset about it. I did not want to make this move. I was crying. I was like, why do we have to do this? And I think in the grand scheme of things, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, is making that move from the small conservative town to this, kind of blue dot of progressiveness and diversity in thought and people in Oklahoma, which is pretty rare. And so I ended up going from fifth grade all the way to college in Norman. And then after that, I ended up moving to the Bay Area of California for a couple years. And now I just moved to LA and I've been here for 2 months. So that's kind of the long story short and my progression from when I was born to now.
Well, I feel like you've gotten so many different experiences, and I'm excited to hear more about those different areas you've lived and how the gay community has been different in each of those. But let's start in Oklahoma. So what ages were you when you lived there?
I was probably like 10. And then I ended up moving from, Owasso to Norman, Oklahoma from there. And so I was 22 when I ended up leaving the state. So that age from I would say 10 to 22 of being in Norman, I think was when I had my biggest growth and learning about my sexuality and what that means. But as for trying to conceptualize everything about my sexuality really started, I feel like, from my initial thoughts of when I was born. Honestly, I feel like, people are like, when did you know you were gay? I think I always knew I was gay, but there was one time in third grade when it really hit me, and I was like, okay, this is something I'm gonna have to work through. I don't know what this is, but I know it's not the normal standard way that everyone else around me is living. So yeah, I would say third grade was kind of the first time I was like, okay, I am different. This is not how everyone feels. But as for when I knew I was gay, I would say I always knew I was gay deep down, even though I didn't have the words or ways to conceptualize what that meant.
Mm-hmm. I remember you previously have told us that when you were in third grade, you kind of had a realization that I need to be kind. I need to make an effort to be kind. And I feel like you can see through your content, that's a mantra that's continued with you throughout your life. How have you both now and then continued to push yourself to lead with kindness?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because I think that is something that I'm really glad that other people can see through my content, because I was thinking the other day, I was like, why did I make these TikToks? Why am I doing this? And it really does relate back to that wanting to be kind and show other people kindness. But how that all initially started was when I was in third grade, realizing that I might be different, that I'm gay, and still not understanding what that means, but having enough knowledge to understand that a lot of people around the world do not like people who are gay, who have these same-sex relationships, who are attracted to someone else who looks just like them. And that was like a really scary moment for me. And I kind of went into this crisis mode of, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle this? I'm a perfectionist. So anything that kind of goes against what seems to be perfect, I need to have a game plan on how I'm going to attack it. And I was very stressed and confused as a third grader, trying to figure out how I was going to come about accepting this piece of me and navigating the world and still being liked and loved and holding up that perfection, way of life. And I remember one day specifically walking into the living room, and Ellen DeGeneres was on, and I didn't know at the time she was gay until watching this particular episode where she looked into the camera and she was like, I want anyone around the world who is watching this right now who is gay and struggling to know that it's going to be okay, that you are loved and that life will get better. And I would end up holding on to that little statement and that piece for the entirety of my life. And even today, I still think about it if something is really on my mind, or I'm really struggling, like, hey, it's going to get better. It's, maybe this is a rough patch, but like, if you're struggling with your sexuality in any way right now, like, life is going to get better. And I always was trying to mimic her in a way in my own life. And I know a lot of people don't like Ellen DeGeneres for various reasons, but I love her because I think she saved my life in a lot of ways. And I never considered myself a funny person. And I knew that Ellen was like funny and kind. So I was like, I don't know that I'll be able to use humor to navigate the world, but I'll try to use kindness to navigate the world, because everyone loved her. And I thought if she could do so wildly great things and be so successful and so loved, even though she was gay, maybe I could do that too. And so I literally changed who I was, I feel like, in that moment moving forward, and just tried to show everyone exceptional kindness and just lead in that way. So
yeah, and I think that's really incredible to see, like, how that impact that she had on you and how you were able to kind of like take on her mission and kind of make it your own. I mean, there's one thing to be said about how Ellen treated her staff, but I think that her mantra and the way that she used her position of influence to make an impact in the world, I don't think that can be denied.
Yeah.
And I totally relate. I watched Ellen's show and I loved the positivity and fun and joy that she brought. So you're in third grade and you see Ellen and you're like, you know what? I'm going to be kind. I'm imagining like 8-year-old Brian, just like, you know what? I'm going to be kind. Like, that's so cool. And as you continued on through elementary school, and you're involved in your community, you were also heavily a part of the church, correct? And you were involved in volunteering and kind of having that community involvement. What was that involvement like in the church?
Interestingly, I did grow up in a religious family, but we weren't the family who went to church every Sunday and, prayed before every meal and was heavily involved, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, there's people who go to church every single day. And when I initially was growing up, that wasn't my experience, but I did consider myself religious. And I was trying to figure out, how to balance this, being gay and then also this, religious aspect that's kind of there with our family. And when we ended up moving to Norman, Oklahoma, that's when I decided that I was going to kind of put myself in that position and go to church almost looking for answers, although I was trying to be kind and I knew I was gay, I had this belief that if I kind of turned to church, that I could get rid of my gayness. I could change that aspect of who I am as a person and get on the right path, I guess you could say, in life and still maintain that perfection mentality of like, okay, I'm going to have 2 kids, a girl and a boy, and I'm going to be married to a wife. And like everything in my life is going to be perfect. My parents will be proud. All my family will be proud and I'll be proud. And so instead of running away from the church because they didn't seem to really like the gays from my mentality at the time, I ran towards it and I got heavily involved. I tried out a few different churches and every single time I was a youth group leader. I was going on mission trips around the world. I was, there day and night, making meals, giving talks, literally the full thing. And I studied the Bible on my free time and was just heavily, heavily involved. And I think it's weird, but because I wanted to be loved and accepted by so many people, I felt that that was going to be the hardest one to win over. And so I was putting all my energy into it and efforts to try to win that love and acceptance from them, while also still trying to change this gayness that I had, like, okay, if I pray hard enough, then it will go away. If I give this sinful life to God, then he's going to change it for me and I'll be on the right path. And so that was kind of that mentality at the time. And then I can dive in more too, if you want.
Yeah. I mean, I initial question that I do have based on what you just said there is, so you would say that when you were, volunteering and being a worship leader, going on these mission trips across the globe, were you hoping that in doing so and trying to really dedicate yourself to the church and to religion, that the gay part of you would just go away and you could be more accepted into like a straight culture?
Absolutely. I think a big part of it was exactly what you said about being accepted into the straight culture, of like being as straight passing as possible to almost survive. It was almost like a survival mechanism of like, okay, I need to acclimate myself into this community to survive. Like, this is the way that you live. This is the way that life works here. Like, you need to be in these positions. And the closer you are to the top, maybe the more God will love me, the more he will want to, help me through this. And it was definitely a lot, I think, for a young person to understand. And, looking back, the thought process seems a little crazy. But, when you're young and you have this big issue that you feel is life or death, you'll kind of do anything to survive. Because, you're also going to these services where they're talking so badly about gay people, or they're perpetuating these stereotypes that you're like, man, I hope that's never me. Like, that's not who I think I am. But if that's who these people are, then like, I need to change that. And so I think a big part of it was me trying to, acclimate into a straight culture while also become straight in a silly way. Now, looking back, I would not change being gay for the world. I'm so thankful, honestly, for these experiences. But at the time, it was rough.
Put us in your shoes during that time. Like, how did it make you feel when you, whether you were like in middle school or high school, you knew that you were gay, but then you were going to these services and they were pretty much like decrying any gayness or homosexuality? Like, how did you interpret and kind of process that messaging?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It was extremely hard. Like, I remember I would go into my car and cry, or I'd go home and cry about it. But even though the messaging was always negative towards the LGBTQ plus community as a whole, I never turned against, my gayness in my life. Like, in the sense of like, I wouldn't talk bad about gay people. I would actively push back on, preachers or members of my youth group when they would say negative things. And I would be like, like, what has a gay person ever done to you that made you think this way? So I would pretend almost to be straight and defend someone who was gay as like a survival mechanism, but you're still in those spots and spaces where like those conversations are going on, and I would try to be strong in the moment. But when I was behind closed doors, it was very emotional and very sad because I had no one I could turn to. I couldn't talk to my parents about it. I couldn't talk to any friends about it. I wasn't out to anyone. So it was just me, myself, and my thoughts, and trying to accept this while defend this entire community, because I felt like there was no one else around me defending anyone who was gay, or I didn't know anyone who was gay. And I was like, man, like, why? It honestly felt like a burden of like trying to defend this community, but like also protect myself, while also trying to acclimate yourself into the straight culture and be straight. It was a very complex and weird dynamic.
Was there ever a moment where you were like, this is enough, I've had it?
Yes. Yeah, there was. There should have been, that moment way before it ended up kind of crumbling down. But I believe it was my junior year in high school, and I was at a Wednesday night small group service. It was just like a group of guys. There was like 6 of us in a room and our youth group leader. And we would do this thing where we would go in a circle and share our highs and our lows of the week just to kind of kick things off. And this day in particular, this was so bizarre to me. I kept it, really positive. And then right next to me was my pastor. And he started with his low of the week. And when he started, he turned and looked directly at me, and we were making eye contact the whole time. I was like, this is odd. Like, I don't know what he's about to say. And he looked at me and he was like, my low of the week is I was playing video games with my friends, and he said that he thought that being gay was okay and that we should still love and accept people who are gay. And he was like, that broke my heart because gay people are very sinful. They're going to go to hell, and they're, an abomination in the eyes of God. And during this whole time, he just was like looking at me. And I was even questioning if this story was real, was he really having that conversation with a friend? Or is he just saying this to get across to me that he knows that I'm gay, and he's trying to tell me that he does not accept it and that it won't be tolerated at the church? And all of me wanted to say something right in that moment, like I had before, where I would, stand up, to some of the people in the room and be like, hey, when has the gay person ever done something negative to you? But this time it was different because it was directed at me. I felt he was talking to me, not just about gay people in the community as a whole. He was like, I know you're gay and we don't accept this. We don't love you. And in that moment, it was heartbreaking because of how much I had given the church, how much time, energy, money I had spent, just there with them. And he was being so hateful. And I just remember saying, Brian, keep your head up, look him in the eye. Don't blink. You can't say anything because you're just not there yet, but stay strong. And I just held it together. I didn't speak a single time during that little Wednesday night service that we had. But after that, I went to my car and I was like, I'm never going back here again. I will not accept that type of hateful behavior. And I honestly haven't seen him since. So
If you right now could go back in time, would you change anything about that situation?
if I could go back in time, no. And the reason I wouldn't change anything in that moment is because that was as strong as I could be. And I think that moment fundamentally changed the way that I look at the world. One, I will never let someone else in a room, maybe it's a community that I don't personally identify with, but if I ever see someone else being attacked in a room, I will not be a bystander. Because I also felt like everyone else in that room knew what was going on, and no one saying anything was so hurtful. And I almost want an apology at times from some of them, because I'm like, how could you sit there and let someone belittle a person who just gives love every single day, who's so kind, who's there for you, and at a moment's notice for literally anything, and then just let them be hated on for no reason. But if I could change the way that went down, no, I wouldn't, because it gave me a lot of strength. I built upon that so much. If I did run into him again, I would say something honestly very light and say that I want you to know that you taught me a lot about loving myself. And I hope that moving forward, you realize that the minds of young children are very moldable, and that your words have severe impacts, and that I'm really thankful that I was strong enough to make it through, because I almost wasn't. But in the future, you should choose to lead with unconditional love and kindness like the Bible preaches. And that, I hope that you start to really do some self-reflection and use your platform to do better. And I'm proud to say that would be my response, because for the longest time, I had a lot of hateful things I wanted to say to him. And I feel like now, where I'm at in life, I've gotten to the point to where I can just say, those hateful things, there's no need for them, because I feel like I would just lower myself to the same playing field that he was on. And I never want to do that.
As Michelle Obama says, when they go low, you go high.
Absolutely.
But what type of Christianity was that church?
It's the weirdest thing. These churches, so because I grew up in kind of a progressive part of Oklahoma, they would all be like these non-denominational churches, but really they were all like secretly Southern Baptist. It was so odd. It was like they were trying to like trick the masses, you know, because they knew that they were Southern Baptist in this progressive area that probably wouldn't attract a lot of people, or no one wanted to say there were these like strong Southern Baptist churches. But then it's like you get in there and then you start to realize like, oh wow, they hold some very traditional beliefs. So it was non-denominational, but like a closeted Southern Baptist church.
That's very interesting. I think it's really crazy to think about how you were doing so much for them and being such a great like disciple, as one may say, or whatever, but like then they decided to call you out and have like that very uncomfortable situation. I think it's really says a lot about them as both an individual and a church, that that's how they feel they should treat people that are being dedicated and trying to like spread God's message. It's hard to hear. I mean, I was involved with religion heavily growing up, and like was a worship leader, and like I was in the praise team at my church, and like I loved it. Went to Christian camp. Like I did it all. And so I can kind of relate to you a little bit when it comes to like being involved and then kind of having that switch. I mean, I've said it before on here, but I had someone very close to in my life growing up who told me to my face that gay people were the devil. And like, there's no way to me that like in that situation that this person didn't know that I wasn't straight. And it's just like the way that Christians, like they preach that, you know, positivity, kindness, loving your neighbor as yourself. And then if someone doesn't fit into their mold, then they decide to attack them, which is something that you can see going on to this day.
Absolutely. It is bizarre. And it's odd when they come and take the attack approach versus the loving approach. I'm like, hypothetically, you do believe that that is a bad thing. Why don't you sit down and say like, hey, let's talk about this. I feel like you're struggling with something, like allow you the platform. Like that's still inappropriate and it's still wrong. But why is it always that they're coming at it from such a hateful place, when if it's really about love and kindness, that you wouldn't take an approach of like, hey, I really care about you. Can we talk about this? Like, what's going on? I want to try to understand you better. I want to see where maybe we can meet in the middle. It's always a hateful comment, and that you're going to hell, or that you're the devil, or that it's always negative. And I'm like, wow, you don't even approach it with love, which is bizarre. But I don't hate religion. I want to make that clear too. I have a lot of friends who are Christian who have treated me very well. I just realized that it wasn't for me, and that in efforts to chase after my most authentic self. And I think for a lot of people in the gay community, maybe similar to you, it's like you got to remove yourself from those spaces at times to learn to love and accept who you are and push forward.
Totally.
I think it's important to realize that there's a difference between people that believe in religion and people that live religion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Would you ever consider going back to the church? I mean, there is versions of Christianity, like ELCL Lutherans, that do accept gays and embrace them. Would you ever be open to that, or no?
You know, it's a hard question because, and I feel like this is a bit related to some trauma related to the church too. One of my stipulations of going to these churches, even as someone who was younger, that I was like, I believe in loving everybody and equality on every single level. And when I would talk to my friends at these churches, they would always say, no, like we're one of the most accepting, one of the most loving churches around. And then I would go and then look behind the curtain or be behind the curtain, and it wasn't always like that. So I feel like I have a bit of hesitancy, even with these churches who market themselves as progressive, accepting churches. Now, I'm sure they really are, but it's just in my experience, I was told this, I go, and then all of a sudden I'm being hated on.
There's this church that I've gone to in the Milwaukee area that is literally like rainbow flags. They have it on their sign that like, we love the gays. And like, it's all, everyone who goes there is like a retired like music teacher is kind of their vibe. And they have like rainbows and like all these banners, and it's very like kind of like you're at your grandma's house. It's kind of like the way it's decorated, but it's very much so like we like love and embrace the gays, and they have like all these certifications and they like make it known. If that was the type of church, let's say like a church in LA that was like that, would you think about going?
Maybe, because I will say that I loved the community that came with church. Like, I loved a lot of aspects of church. Like, it was so fun. Like, you have a lot of good friends, you have places to go, people who have your back. Like, I'm not hating on the church people for everything, because they were such loyal, good friends and such a strong community, because you're all believing in the same thing and you're working together to kind of grow that belief. So I think there's a lot of positive aspects to it. And so, yeah, I think I would be open to a church like that. I'm also someone who has found my own type of religion and like the universe and manifesting and just believing that like if you put good energy out there, good energy comes back to you. And so I think that's kind of the mindset and the train I'm on now. But I could see myself, honestly, when I'm 30, kind of going back into an accepting and loving church.
Okay, cool. So have you had any interactions with those people from your church following your departure?
In college, they would call me like the Democrat. It was so weird. It was like I would get made fun of for being a Democrat all the time by them. And they would still, it's like they didn't know how to interact with someone who was openly gay. So they would just be like, oh, it's the Democrat. And I would be like, that is such an odd thing to say to someone. But yeah, I'm a Democrat, I guess, for Oklahoma. I believe in equal rights, believe in loving others. So that's really where it's at. But if you want to call me a Democrat, then sure.
So you were in high school. Is that when you kind of came out more publicly?
Let's dive into that. That's a fun, interesting topic. So I feel like as a gay person, sometimes you have to come out multiple times. So there was so many coming out stories. I feel like I don't just have one. But the most public one was in high school. The first public one was in high school. And I had ended up sending nudes to someone at a neighboring high school. And I wasn't out, and I hadn't done like anything with anyone because I was so scared of everyone finding out. And I was pretty well known in my high school. I was like student council president. I was prom king. Like I just was always involved in everything. You know, it's like people knew who I was, but that also scared me. Was keeping me closeted because I was like, oh God, if people find this stuff out, like they won't vote for me or they won't want me to be their friend. So I tried my best to not let anyone know. So I ended up sending nudes to someone at a neighboring school who told a person who was also openly gay at my high school. And I'm sure there was suspicions about me being gay at the time, but I just would have never come up and outed myself about it. So once this kid knew that I was gay from his friend at the other school, he started telling everyone. And one of my best friends who did know at the time came up to me and was like, Brian, like, I just got asked if you were gay. And I just want to let you know that this is going around the school. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is the moment. Like, you know, like everyone, like people are talking about it. It's like the tea, the 5 minutes of tea, you know, happening right now. Everyone's getting told. And I was like, this isn't fair that they're going to get to take this piece of me and just share it. And it's going to be a rumor. So later that day, I had my student council class, and I go up to my advisor and I'm like, I need to make an announcement. And she was like, okay. So then she like starts yelling and she's like, everyone, like, Brian needs to make an announcement. And people were like cheering me on. Like, they had no idea what I was about to say. They're like, oh, like our president's about to say something, like, woo, like, go Brian. And I was like, oh God, this is going to be like so bizarre because they're thinking I'm going to talk about like school related stuff. And I was like, I'm gay, and I just wanted you all to know. And then the room was silent for like 45 seconds. I kid you not. I was just standing there like, this is so freaking awkward. Like, what is happening? And then collectively, people just stood up and cheered. It was so weird because I don't think anyone knew what to do. They were just like, okay, like, cool. And then they cheered. And my advisor pulls me aside and she was like, thank you for sharing. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you know Ellen DeGeneres? And I was like, yeah. And she was just like, yeah. I was like, what? People just did not know how to respond. Oh. I don't know that they had experienced a moment like that of someone just like coming out. And so I just had so many bizarre interactions. And like some of the bros that I was like trying to be broy with, like in the corner, were like awkwardly like clapping, and they like come shake my hand and they're like, that's cool, Brian. I was like, thanks. I don't know. It was very odd. But from that moment, I just kind of tried to own it and be myself, and really tried to, in high school at least, not make it my personality, but also be like, being gay is okay. And I'm a firm believer that you got to love everybody. And if you don't, then please walk the other way. So that was kind of the first time I came out in high school.
Well, that's a really cool story. It's really very much so giving Heartstopper or Love, Simon, very much so feels like a Netflix show or something. And definitely that's a very iconic way to come out, Brian. Love that moment for you. But to move up a few years, in college you were part of a frat, right? And you had also taken on a leadership role in that frat. Did you enter that frat out, or did you kind of go back into the closet and then have to come back out? And how did they deal with you being gay in the frat?
So for a little bit of context too, after graduating high school, I feel like I went back into the closet a bit because I was entering into a new, unfamiliar environment. I'm going to be meeting a lot of new people. And although I was out in high school, it was majority of those people aren't going to the same college as me, maybe a few. And if so, it's probably an irrelevant fact because I'm not going to be hanging out with them. And so I entered into college, meeting all these new people, and just did not disclose it and kept it just under wraps. I would never talk about relationships. And if I did, I would always say they, them, this person, because I just didn't want to lie. If someone was to ask me about it, I was going to give the truth, but I also didn't want to put it out there because I was so insecure about it still. And really in high school, putting on a front and trying to champion, being proud of who I am, even though I was still struggling so much because I wasn't ready to do that. But I also did not want someone else to take that away from me. And so I was kind of trying to navigate college in that way. And I ended up joining a fraternity and ended up becoming the social chair pretty quickly. And they were always loving, always accepting of me. They wanted me to become the president of the fraternity pretty quickly, honestly. And I was so excited to be a part of this group and to feel so supported. But we were building the fraternity up from the ground, and I overheard a conversation, and this was when we had probably 60 members, of two of my friends, who I consider my friend at the time, say, we got to stop letting gay people into this fraternity or people are going to think that this is a gay frat. And we cannot have that reputation if we're trying to be the number one house. And I sat with that statement for the rest of the day. And I thought, this is the group of people that are going to be representing me, and I am actively supporting and standing behind this organization. I'm putting my name on this organization. Do I want that? My answer was no, because it didn't align with my morals. It didn't align with my values and the message I wanted to give the world, because anyone who is not going to allow someone who's gay into a fraternity because of their sexuality was not a group I wanted to be a part of. And I also knew at the same time that they really needed me in this fraternity at the time. They needed me in that role. They needed my accomplishments in a way, because I was bringing good grades. I was bringing scholarships. I was bringing in campus involvement, which all made the group look really good. And so I came to them the next day and said, hey, I have to drop. And they were like, we'll make it free. Please stay. What's going on? And I was like, to be honest, this is what I overheard. A group of people saying that they didn't want to allow gay people into the fraternity. That does not align with what I believe. And I'm no longer going to associate with this group. And I wish you all the best. But I hope you know, too, that even when you're having a passing conversation, people overhear you, and your words have a lot of power and impact. And you never know who's listening. And it may seem like just a statement to you, but it can have serious consequences on other people's lives and the way they view themselves. So I had to quit. And I think that was a really good moment in my growth, too, of when push comes to shove, do I try to become more straight passing? Do I let things slide, or do I take a stance and follow what I believe is right? So
a lot of people like to protect their opinion and say, oh, it's my opinion. But a lot of times it hurts people. They don't understand that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Spot on. And I'm really glad that you made that step and didn't let them walk over you or disrespect you. Moving on from that in college, were you then more like active in the gay community following that exit?
Yeah, so I ended up coming out on Instagram with this silly little picture that has like a rainbow edit in the background. I'm like, what was I doing? But so I came out just officially because I was like, I'm done, having to redo these coming out moments. Like, I'm gay. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. I'll tell you straight up if you ask, but now that it's on social media, like, there is no question. I've tweeted about it. I've put it out on my Instagram, like, it's there. And so then following, the next few years in college, I really still didn't associate myself a lot with the gay community. And I think that came down to still being in Oklahoma, trying to still fit in, even though I was, still advocating for myself. Honestly, I want to say I was trying to advocate for the LGBTQ plus community, and that was a big part of it. But I was also trying to be my own advocate and say, like, hey, like, I can be here in this space and like still be loved and accepted for who I am. TikTok was my outlet, I think, when it came to having a space to express my sexuality, which was odd because it felt like I could create a video or talk about an experience and not feel judged or insecure because I'm just talking into a camera and I can just be my most authentic self. Whereas a lot of the spaces I was in, I wasn't sure if that was going to be accepted. I wasn't sure if I would get the scholarship. I wasn't sure if I would get onto the committee of that group because people's implicit bias play a big role into, your own success. And so I was someone who was very involved on campus and leadership. And I would think, can the university put someone who's gay at the forefront of this scholarship? Can they take a picture? If I'm outwardly gay, can they have that and still get donors? Can they have someone who's gay in this organization actively speaking out about X, Y, and Z? Is he a risk? And so I know that sounds so silly, but that was what I was so scared of at the time. And so TikTok is where I really turned to be vocal about it. And again, when you're young, you're trying to just understand the world. And looking back, it probably wasn't that serious, but that's how I felt in the moment.
I'm glad that TikTok was that like resource. And I feel like it's really become a great place for so many people to like see people that reflect their own experience and help others realize that they aren't alone in what they're going through. And it really helps people become more comfortable. And I think that's one of the great parts of social media is that ability to have community, no matter where you are. But from not being involved in the gay community to then moving to San Francisco, that's quite the jump, right? San Francisco is known as like one of the most prominent gay cities in the country. Tell us a little bit about how when you moved to San Francisco, how your involvement in the gay community kind of changed.
So when I moved to San Francisco, I still didn't have a solid group of gay friends. Honestly, the most involvement I've had has been in the last 2 months here in LA. But in San Francisco, it felt a lot more normalized. You could be walking around and someone's gay and it's just normal. Like it's okay. Like, yeah, they're the gay person. Like, cool. Like, there's no additional thought to it. And that was something that I was not used to because I felt like people who are in the LGBTQ plus community in Oklahoma are almost like zoo animals. Like if someone can tell, they're like looking. You're at like a meal and it's two guys who seem to be on a date. Like, people are going to be staring like, oh, what's going on over there? Like, are they gay or like they friends or what's the vibe? San Francisco, it's not like that. It's just like, oh, it's two people hanging out. If they're even thinking about it, like they're probably not even going to turn their heads, which is a beautiful thing. It's like they're just normal people going on a date. And so I think that was the coolest part about moving to California. And even just the conversations that were being had, like, people were respectful of pronouns. People seemed like 10 years ahead in the way they thought about these issues, which was so refreshing and so nice, and just learning to love and accept myself too. And I think that really allowed me to kind of even start posting more on TikTok and being open about everything.
Well, speaking of TikTok, you have had quite a moment. For me personally, I saw you on my For You page when it came to your gym crush and the chronicles of the gym crush. As you've been in LA now, do you have a new gym crush? Like, what's the scene looking like?
Okay, so on the topic of gym crushes and LA, the difference between the Bay Area and LA is that, like, in the Bay, you know, there's a lot of good looking people, but like not everyone's like a model. So it's really easy to kind of look across the gym and be like, oh, wow, like I'm crushing on that person. In LA, everyone is like a 10 out of 10 with the perfect body, great skin, amazing hair. They're wearing like this gym outfit that looks like it's in a magazine, and there's like hundreds of people in these gyms. So I would say finding a gym crush in LA is a lot harder because everyone you're surrounded by is just hot. It's like, okay, collectively, this gym is my gym crush. Like, I would be happy to look like anyone in this gym. Anyone on the street, I'm like, it's insane. So I wouldn't say I have a new gym crush, but I have been trying to put myself out there a little bit more. I had a situationship for a long time in the Bay where I really liked someone and it didn't end up working out, which led to this gym crush saga. But then I had to move to LA. And so now I'm like, okay, I want to get out there. I want to start dating again. And that's really exciting. But on the topic of TikTok, it gets interesting because when you're posting about your gym crushes, your experiences when you're talking to someone, if they have seen your TikTok, they don't necessarily want to be the next story. They would rather be a listener versus the topic. So that's been, and I'm like, that's completely fair. Like, I wouldn't want someone to create a TikTok about me and be like, oh my God, I went on this date with someone. It was wild. Here's what happened. So that's been kind of the interesting switch.
So to talk a little bit about the LA gay scene further, like how would you describe kind of the going out scene? You've been in a few different cities, Oklahoma, the Bay Area, now LA. To those who maybe, you know, haven't gone out in LA before, what's the vibe like?
Oh my gosh. It's so gay, but in the best way. You go out to a bar and there's like, if you're in WeHo, there's a strip of gay bars, and it's so fun because it just feels like a bar. Like, it is a gay bar, but it's just a bar with a bunch of gay people, and it's very fun. You don't feel like you're going anywhere different. You're just going to a bar with your friends, and like everyone around you is just happens to be gay too. And that feels so good. You know, you're not like, oh, we had to like go and find this one random bar in this whole city that like happens to label themselves as a gay bar like it was in Oklahoma, because here it's everything's just gay and it's really fun and exciting and makes you just love yourself and the community even more. Being surrounded by people who are so open and accepting. There has been like a few interesting moments that I wasn't expecting. For example, I went to an after party in the hills one day after the gay clubs, and I was like, oh, this will be cool. I've never really experienced anything like that. And we get to this big mansion house, and I go in, I'm thinking, you know, whose house is this? Is this like an influencer's house? Is this like someone, like a kid's parents' house, like that they just like now they've grown up and can use it? Or what is the vibe? What's going on here? And I see a bunch of people all in their 20s, all gay, like my age, walking around. I'm like, surely none of them own this home. Like, what's going on? And then there's this one like older man who walks around the corner, and I was like, okay, so he's the homeowner. So I go and talk to him, and like there's all these like young gays in this big house having this like after party, and he's just like the old gay homeowner. And I was like, this is very interesting, but like, you know, you just go and you're like, hi, like, you kind of flirt with the man. It was so bizarre. But I was like, thanks for letting us be here. Like, it's so fun. Like, let's take a shot together. And then that just happens every Friday night. And I was like, this is such a bizarre scene of all these, like, young gays flirting with this old man so that we can have fun in his house. It just was weird.
I'm so glad that like you are loving LA. I feel like it's such like a great community, and there's so many like great opportunities there. I guess to kind of just wrap things up here, Brian, if you were to think back to the version of yourself who is growing up in Oklahoma and dealing with, you know, those uncomfortable situations at church, like, is there any piece of advice that you would give to him?
Oh my gosh, yes. I would tell my younger self that it's all going to be okay, that it is going to get better, and that the sooner you can really embrace your most authentic self, the sooner life starts to just all make sense. I think so often that we push against what we feel is right because we're so scared to accept that piece of us, but that's really our superpower. You know, when you learn to just love who you are, people can start to love you too, because you are just your authentic self. You are just your most genuine self. And that's something that is still hard to find in society today. So when you come across someone who is loving and genuine, I think it makes people want to help you, and it just makes your life really good. So I would just say it's going to get better, Brian. Love yourself. Just hang in there and just keep pushing forward. And I hope that other people in the same space can hear that same message too.
Yes, that's really, really good advice. Thank you for that, Brian. Well, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to speak with us. It's been such a pleasure getting to hear your story. Do you want to give everyone your socials so they can check you out?
Yes. Okay. Follow me at Barack_O_Brian on TikTok and Instagram. I would love to be your friends.
Yes, love it. You can follow us on Instagram at UnpackTHT and on TikTok at UnpackThatPod, and we'll see you guys right back here every other Thursday. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.